Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. Victoria, Isabella said, her voice firm but not unkind. I didn't come here to make things more difficult for you. I came because I think we both lost something. A son, a man we loved, and now I think it's time we stop letting that loss control us. Victoria's lips curled into a bitter smile. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling with emotion that she couldn't quite hide. You think because you're rich and successful, you can walk back into our lives and fix everything? Well, it doesn't work that way. Isabella stood her ground. I'm not here to fix you or Joe. I'm here because we all lost him. And I think it's time we stop pretending that we can carry all of this alone. You're not alone anymore. None of us are. Victoria blinked, her expression changing for a brief moment as she processed Isabella's words. For a second, she almost looked like the woman Joe had married, the woman who once stood beside him, full of life, full of ambition. But then that look faded, and the woman in front of them was just a shadow of who she once had been. You think I don't know that? Victoria snapped, her voice suddenly louder, more defensive. I've been alone for so long, I don't even know what it feels like to have someone who actually cares anymore. I lost my son, Joe. I lost him. Isabella didn't flinch. She understood. She understood the depth of her pain, the anger that came with losing the one person who had meant everything. She had carried that weight for years, but she had never stopped loving Emmanuel. And I lost him too, Victoria, Isabella said quietly. I loved him. I still do. The words hung in the air between them, thick with emotion. Victoria turned her gaze to the ground, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't speak. Joe took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice soft but filled with years of regret. Victoria, I know we've been through hell. I know you've been through things I can't even begin to imagine. But we can't keep living like this. We can't keep punishing ourselves for what happened. And we can't keep blaming each other. For the first time since they had arrived, Victoria's eyes softened just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Isabella to see that there was still a part of her that wanted to be healed. We're both broken, Victoria, Joe continued. But that doesn't mean we can't try to put the pieces back together. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes moist but her face still hardened with years of unresolved grief. I don't know how to trust again, she said softly, as if the words were an admission of weakness she was reluctant to make. Isabella gently placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch light but firm. You don't have to trust me right now, Victoria, but let me help. Let me give you a place to stay, a bed to sleep in, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to start over. The offer hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope amidst years of sorrow. Victoria didn't say anything at first. She just stood there looking at Isabella and then at Joe as if weighing the options. And in that silence, a part of her began to soften, just enough to allow a small sliver of light in. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she nodded slowly. I'll come with you, she whispered. But I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Isabella. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself. Isabella smiled, a small, understanding smile. You don't have to forgive me yet, Victoria. Just let me help. The walk back to Isabella's car was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the day had settled over them, and though Victoria had agreed to come, she moved with the hesitance of someone who wasn't quite sure of their decision. She clutched her bag tightly, her knuckles pale while Joe kept his eyes straight ahead, trying to ignore the constant tugging at his heart. There was so much to say, so many things left unspoken. But the silence between them was a reminder that they were all still learning to navigate the wreckage of their past. As they reached the car, Isabella opened the passenger door for Joe, and he climbed in with the careful slowness of someone who had become used to a life of quiet struggles. She then walked around to the other side, but when she opened the door for Victoria, the woman paused, her gaze fixed on the darkening sky. There was a certain heaviness about her, as if her shoulders carried the weight of too many lost years. Isabella stood quietly by the car, waiting. She could feel Victoria's resistance, that inner battle between the desire to move forward and the fear of being disappointed again. It wasn't easy to trust. It never had been for any of them, especially after all that had happened. But Isabella could see something in Victoria's eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. After a long moment, Victoria sighed and climbed into the car. As the door shut behind her, the world seemed to shift ever so slightly. It wasn't a grand, sweeping change, but it was enough for Isabella to feel it deep in her chest. The drive to Isabella's home was quiet, the hum of the engine, the only sound in the car. The streets blurred past, the city lights reflecting off the windows like distant stars. They passed through neighborhoods, each more familiar than the last, each one a reminder of the life Isabella had built, the successes and the luxuries she had worked so hard to achieve. But now, in the presence of Joe and Victoria, it all seemed so small, so insignificant compared to the deeper needs that had drawn them together tonight. Isabella glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Victoria, her face pale but unwavering. She couldn't say she had any answers for the woman. She didn't know how to fix what had been broken, but she was willing to try, and that was a start. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of responsibility, not to her business or her reputation, but to people. When they arrived at the house, Isabella got out and unlocked the front door. It was a grand home, spacious and inviting, with warm lights spilling from every window. But as they walked inside, the air was thick with unspoken emotions. The walls seemed to hold memories of her own, a life she had built alone, with no one to share it. Isabella led them into the living room, where a soft fire crackled in the hearth. She motioned for Joe and Victoria to sit on the plush sofa, but they both hesitated. Joe lowered himself onto the couch, his back slightly bent, looking worn and tired. Victoria stood at the doorway for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, as if she couldn't believe she was there. Isabella stepped into the kitchen, quickly preparing a light meal. It was a small gesture, but she hoped it would break the tension. When she returned with plates of food, she found Victoria and Joe still sitting quietly, their silence almost palpable. Isabella set the plates on the coffee table and sat across from them, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I know this is a lot," she began, her voice soft but steady, "but I want you both to know that you're safe here, for however long you need." Victoria's gaze flickered toward her, but she said nothing. Instead, she picked up her plate, her fingers barely brushing the edges of the food. Her hesitation was clear, and Isabella could see that Victoria wasn't ready to let go of the wall she had built to protect herself. Joe, on the other hand, took a bite of the food, his face softening slightly as he chewed. He wasn't used to having a proper meal, but it felt like a comfort to him, a reminder that there was still some kindness left in the world. After swallowing, he looked at Isabella. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough. "We haven't had a real meal in a long time." Isabella nodded, smiling warmly. "You don't have to thank me. Joe, this is just the first step. We can take this one day at a time." Victoria finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how long I can stay here, Isabella." Her words were heavy with doubt. "I don't know if I can ever go back to what we had, what we lost." Isabella sat forward, her hands resting on her knees as she looked at Victoria with compassion. "I'm not asking you to go back to anything," she said. "I just want to help you find a way to move forward, together." Victoria's eyes flickered with emotion, but she quickly looked away. She wasn't ready to confront the truth yet, not tonight, but something in her seemed to soften. Maybe it was the warmth of the house, or the kindness that Isabella was offering without any expectation in return. But Victoria felt a part of her beginning to thaw. Joe set his plate down, and his gaze met Isabella's. His eyes were filled with gratitude, but also a profound sadness. "We lost everything, Isabella," he said. "But maybe, just maybe, we can start over. Maybe we can finally stop running from the pain." Isabella nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Starting over wasn't easy, and it would take time, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. "We'll take it one step at a time," Isabella said softly, offering both of them a reassuring smile. "But I'll be here to help. You don't have to go through this alone." The room fell into a quiet peace, the fire crackling softly in the background, and the world outside seemed far away. The pain of the past hadn't gone, but for the first time in a long time, they were together, not as strangers, but as survivors willing to face whatever came next. Isabella stood up, and as she walked toward the kitchen, she felt a sense of purpose, a sense that, despite everything that had happened, maybe they could still rebuild something from the ashes of their past. The following days moved slowly, each one blending into the next with the faintest traces of change. Isabella had opened her home to Joe and Victoria, offering them a space where they could finally breathe, a sanctuary from the harsh realities of their past. But change, she knew, couldn't happen overnight. Healing took time, especially when the wounds ran so deep. Each morning she woke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, the sunlight streaming into the room, warming the edges of the day. Yet despite the beauty outside, there was still tension in the house. Joe and Victoria's silent suffering seemed to fill the space around them, lingering like an unspoken weight. The conversations were brief, always careful, as though every word was chosen with the utmost precision to avoid causing further cracks in the fragile bond they were trying to rebuild. Isabella spent her days organizing her work, but her thoughts were often elsewhere. She would check on Joe and Victoria regularly, making sure they were eating, that they were settling in. At first they were hesitant, reluctant to get too comfortable. Old habits die hard, and the reality of their situation had shaped them in ways that would take time to undo. It was clear that Victoria wasn't ready to embrace the comfort Isabella was offering her. She still kept to herself most of the time, sitting in the corner of the living room with a book or staring out the window. She often avoided conversation, her face a mask of sorrow and regret. Joe, on the other hand, had started talking more, sharing stories of his younger years with Isabella over cups of coffee in the morning. He seemed more willing to open up, to acknowledge the pain, though his grief still weighed him down. One afternoon, Isabella found herself sitting with Joe in the kitchen. He had been helping her with the small tasks around the house, washing dishes, sorting through mail, but it was clear his body was starting to give out. The signs of age and hardship were more visible now, his movements slower, his joints stiffening. But there was a quiet resolve in him, something that told her he still had a spark left inside. As they sat across from each other, Joe took a slow sip of his coffee, staring into the cup as though searching for something hidden in the dark liquid. Isabella watched him for a moment before speaking. "How are you feeling, Joe?" she asked gently, her voice filled with genuine care. Joe looked up at her, his expression a mixture of weariness and something else. Perhaps embarrassment, perhaps hope. "I'm tired," he said slowly, his voice low. "Tired in a way that's hard to explain. I don't think I've felt truly tired until now. Before, there was always something to do, always someone to care for. But now, it's just me, and I feel like I've lost everything." Isabella leaned forward, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table. "I understand," she said quietly. "I know it's hard, but you don't have to do this alone anymore." Joe shook his head, his gaze distant. "I've never really known what it means to be truly alone," he admitted. "Even when Emmanuel was alive, there was always someone to look after, someone to care for. And now," his voice faltered and he wiped his hand across his face. Isabella didn't say anything. She simply sat there, giving him space to let the words fall where they may. Sometimes silence was the most healing thing. Joe stared at the cup again, his hand shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened," he murmured. "I know I should have done more. Maybe if I had been a better father, I could have saved him. I could have kept him safe." Isabella shook her head. "You did the best you could, Joe. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets. But we can't live in the past forever." Joe sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know how to move forward," he said quietly. "I've spent so much time looking back, wondering where I went wrong. I'm not sure there's any way to fix things." Isabella reached across the table, gently placing her hand over his. The connection was simple but powerful. "You don't have to fix everything today, Joe," she said softly. "You just have to take one step at a time. We're all still here. We're still alive. And we can still make something of what's left." Joe looked up at her, his eyes filled with unshed tears, and for a moment he allowed himself to believe her. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. Meanwhile, in the other room, Victoria was sitting by the window, her face turned toward the fading light of the afternoon. The stillness around her was oppressive, but it was the only thing she knew. She had been living with the shadow of Emmanuel's death for so long that the idea of moving on felt impossible. Forgiveness was a word she had abandoned. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind her. She turned and saw Joe standing in the doorway, looking at her with a quiet, searching gaze. "How are you doing?" he asked softly, stepping into the room. Victoria didn't answer at first. She couldn't. The words were lodged in her throat as if saying anything would make it all real. The loss, the emptiness, the pain that had taken over her heart. Joe stood silently for a moment, then spoke again. "I know you're angry. I know you're scared." Victoria finally looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, her voice a whisper. "I'm so tired, Joe. I'm so tired of feeling this way. I don't know how to forgive myself for what happened. I don't know how to forgive you." Joe nodded, his expression achingly sad. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But we don't have to carry this pain forever. We can still find a way to live again, even if it's small steps." Victoria stared at him, her heart torn between the past and the possibility of a future. Could she find it in herself to forgive? Could she learn to let go of the bitterness that had poisoned her soul for so long? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. A tiny spark of hope. The days that followed were filled with small, almost imperceptible changes. Joe and Victoria stayed in Isabella's home, and while they were still haunted by the ghosts of their past, they were learning to navigate the present step by step. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of their grief felt unbearable. But there was something comforting about the routine they had started to build. A reminder that even after the most devastating losses, life still moved forward. Each morning, Isabella would prepare breakfast for them, always making sure there was plenty of food, a simple act of care that was often met with awkward silence. But sometimes, just sometimes, a soft smile or a shared glance. Joe had started to speak more about his memories of Emmanuel, and though his voice often cracked with emotion, he felt something shift inside him. He was no longer trying to forget. Instead, he was beginning to accept that the memories would stay with him, but they didn't have to weigh him down forever. Victoria, however, still struggled. She sat quietly most mornings, staring out of the window, lost in thought. It was clear that she wasn't ready to engage yet. The walls around her heart were high, and every attempt to get through felt like it was met with resistance. Isabella noticed, but she didn't push. She knew that healing couldn't be rushed. It was a delicate process, one that required patience. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere was a little different. The air seemed to hum with an unspoken expectation, though no one was willing to voice it. Joe and Victoria both picked at their food, but there was a sense that something had shifted in the room. The silence was no longer as heavy. There was room to breathe. Finally, Joe put down his fork, looking over at Victoria. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't ready to move forward, but she was starting to look at the world again. She wasn't just lost in the past anymore. She was beginning to feel something else, something small but undeniable. Hope. "I've been thinking," Joe said quietly, his voice breaking the silence. Both Victoria and Isabella turned their attention to him. "Maybe it's time we start talking about what comes next." Victoria's eyes darted to the floor, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her napkin. She was still uncertain, still afraid of what forgiveness meant, of what moving on meant. She didn't want to let go of the pain because it felt like letting go of Emmanuel. It felt like betraying him. But Joe's words were soft, yet firm. "I know we can't undo what happened. We can't bring Emmanuel back. But maybe, just maybe, we can start living again." Victoria's chest tightened at the words. The thought of moving forward felt foreign to her, almost like a betrayal to the life she had once known. But looking at Joe, she could see the change in him. He wasn't the same man who had entered this house broken and beaten. There was a glimmer of light in his eyes now, a reflection of the healing he was starting to do. And if he could try, maybe she could too. Isabella watched them both, knowing that this was a crucial moment. For Joe, the first step toward healing had already begun. But for Victoria, the road would be much harder. Yet, she also knew that sometimes it only took one small step to begin the journey of healing. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've held on to for so long." Isabella stood up and walked over to her. sitting beside her at the table. She placed a gentle hand on Victoria's arm. "Forgiveness doesn't happen all at once," she said softly. "It's not something you just wake up and decide to do. It's something you choose to do little by little, every day." Victoria looked up at her, her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I can't? What if I can't let go of the anger, of the pain?" Isabella squeezed her arm reassuringly. "You don't have to let it all go at once, but you can try. You can start with just one step, one small decision to be open to healing." Victoria swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that there was something better waiting for her. But after so many years of carrying the weight of regret and sorrow, the thought of letting it all go was terrifying. For the first time in months, Joe leaned forward, his voice filled with soft conviction. "We've been stuck for so long, Victoria. Maybe it's time we try something different. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm not asking you to forgive me or anyone else overnight. But maybe we can start moving forward together." There was a long pause. Victoria wiped her eyes and took a slow breath, as if trying to prepare herself for what came next. Then she looked at Joe, really looked at him. "Okay," she whispered. "Maybe we can try. Maybe we can start over." Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with relief. It wasn't the perfect answer, but it was the answer they needed, a step forward. The next few weeks passed with small, quiet victories. There were still moments of tension, of silence, but there were also moments of connection. They began to talk more openly, each conversation peeling back another layer of the past, allowing them to rebuild piece by piece. It wasn't a quick process, and there were days when the weight of their grief threatened to pull them back into the past. But they kept going, one step at a time. Joe began to get more involved around the house, helping Isabella with repairs and learning to cook with her. It was small, mundane things, but it felt important. Victoria still struggled, but she started to join them for meals, to speak more, even if it was only a few words at a time. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sun set over the hills, listening to the quiet hum of the world around them. It was in those moments, sitting side by side, that they began to realize that life could still be worth living together. If you find this story interesting and want to see more touching, tense, but meaningful situations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this story with your friends and remember to like the video so we can stay motivated to bring you more great and meaningful content. Thank you for watching and supporting us.